And welcome everyone to this week's Maternity and Midwifery Hour. My name's Sue Macdonald and I'm the curator for the Maternity and Midwifery Hour and the Maternity and Midwifery Festivals. And it's my pleasure to be chairing this evening's session. I've got two lovely guests this evening, Juliet Rayment and Mira Waligora. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Mira. And they've come to do studenty type focus things, which is lovely. But before we get them to speak, you know the drill. We always ask our guests to share with us a moment of the week, and I'm going to start with Mira. I think both of these moments are lovely, but Mira will start.
Brilliant, Sue. Thank you so much. So my moment of the week, the other day, I live in Glasgow and I was out for a walk with my dog the other day. We were along the river, and on the other side of the river, in the hedges, in the bushes, there was not one, not two, but three foxes just playing around and chasing each other. And it was just such a lovely moment of glimmer of nature to see them in the daylight for a wee insight into their life. So that's stuck in my mind as a wee moment of the week.
And that's a lovely moment to share. Shall we go on to Juliet now?
My moment is also a walk-related moment. I went for a walk at the weekend with my daughter, who's 9, and with the main objective to get as muddy as possible. But we came across a hedge, and I'm a big fan of hedges. They're places that are boundaries between two spaces, but also they're places of themselves. Creatures live inside them. And I climbed inside the hedge, which is one of my favourite things to do. You do come out looking like you've been dragged through a hedge backwards, but it's really fun. So I recommend that as a pastime.
Oh, that's wonderful. So you were with all the creatures in the hedge for a few minutes.
Just for a few minutes, you have to find a space you can squeeze into.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting if there was a fox or two. If it was the
That
same
would be a
hedge,
surprise, wouldn't it?
it just conjures this wonderful nature picture for me, both of you. But it's interesting, you're both doing walking, which is, I'll have to commend this to our listeners. Very healthy, very good for, breathing and mindfulness. So thank you so much for sharing your moment. Now we'll go a little bit on to our normal features plus the news, and then we will return to Juliet and Mira in due course. Okay, so I'm just going to, for those of you who are new, and I know there's some new people online, but I also know we've got some old friends, so welcome to both groups of you. And to those of you who are new, you may be interested, and even if you're not, I'm going to tell you, in where the Maternity and Midwifery Hour came from. And we were born right at the beginning of the COVID pandemic in March 2020. And we were born because before that, we did things like conferences, study days, and events. And then from that time, practitioners, midwives, student midwives weren't permitted to go to things like study days or conferences or festivals. And of course, everything was focused on COVID and coping with that, changing services and working around it. And we worked out that having an hour a week would be a really good thing to do for midwives and student midwives and anyone in maternity services, really. And obviously, when we started, we did a lot more on COVID-19. We did a lot about how services were changing and what midwives were doing to carry on providing care to women and babies. And also what educationists were doing to ensure the student midwives were protected, but also got their experience so they at least could qualify as midwives. So it's a very anxious time. And so every now and then you kind of think it's like a lifetime away. You can almost not remember it. And then something will happen, you think, oh, where's my hand gel? And you'll suddenly remember those times. Or you see a queue outside a shop and think, we used to have to queue with a bit in between us, not to be too close, and it's then not so far away. So what we also did, and what we all do now, is everything is recorded. So everything on Maternity and Midwifery Hour is accessible through the Matflix site. They look after everything for us, and you can subscribe. It's not too expensive, but you can also get things via the YouTube. So some of our things are there too. But it is a very good resource. It's very useful if you're doing a project or a dissertation, or you're studying something, because there's a huge amount of information and clips. And I mean, it's like I know today, listening to somebody talk about their research or practice development, the person that's doing it, it comes alive, it means something, and you kind of think, oh, we could try that here, and that makes you think a little bit different. So it's a really interesting way of learning. So that's great. So do enjoy this evening, and you're allowed to share. You're allowed to share. So if you enjoy it, I'm sure you will, maybe share the link when you get it through with your colleagues. Maybe over, if you actually have a quiet minute in the clinical area, have a chat and share that. We love that, to you all to do that. So that's great. So, and again, I'm going to, and I always at this point say a big thank you to the midwives and student midwives and the maternity care support workers working so hard in the clinical area at the moment, because it's winter, there's more bugs about, people are getting them, and therefore who doesn't get the bugs is having to do a little bit more extra work. And it, you know, we do it, but it's very tiring. So good on you, and thank you for what you're doing. Okay, I'm moving a little bit onto the news, because I haven't got a huge amount of news, because we were very, very busy yesterday, because we were at the London Maternity and Midwifery Festival, and it was a fab day. We had some fantastic things going on. We had some Jill Walton, Chief Exec from the Royal College of Midwives, spoke, as did Nina Casadea, Chief Midwife for London, and Nikki Wilson, talking about trauma-informed care, and that, which was really interesting also. Jenny Wyland was talking about bullying, especially in the context of students, so that was very relevant. And then Nikki Clark was talking about student retention and support. We also had, and I ought to say, there's links in our resources, which Paul will be putting in online on Facebook, that you can access some of these things. And I've included things like the 3-year maternity and neonatal strategy, which is still, I think it's 2 years in now. I've included the RCM strategy that's just fresh off the print, and also a really interesting tool that some of you will know about, but it's about a questionnaire for trauma assessment tool, and it has a questionnaire for midwives. It also has one for women, and it's a very useful tool to think about how we focus on women, maybe when we're booking them and looking at their previous experience, or if we're doing postnatal care, to see how their experience was. It's very interesting. So that's in the resources there available to you. I'm also going to say huge congratulations to the Trailblazers, who got their bottle of champagne and a little certificate yesterday, which was very nice. And one was towards the Middlesex University education team for what they're doing. And one went to Olakemi Akinmeji, who's a multi-ethnic empowerment lead midwife at Barking Havering, for the work she's done. And also Nikki Clark, lead midwife for education at Hull and chair of the Lead Midwives for Education strategic group. So they're all very trailblazery, and it was lovely to see them, and they're all very overwhelmed for getting their awards, but that was really lovely. So I've got the city trade. I'm just checking I'm not missing anything. And also, actually, the other thing that was mentioned was the Safe Learning Charter, which is focused on student learning needs and safety for them in terms of how they can learn the best. And that was actually, when it was mentioned, some people didn't seem to know about it, and it made me think maybe we need to hear about that again. So we're going to try and circulate that to people in the next few days. We had it presented in Bath on a lovely sunny day in Bath last year, so that'll come through to everybody. So I'm chasing through, but this week we're just going to move on to students, and also about the midwives and the clinical environment, which is obviously where the students are being placed, and it's a really important place for students, and it can have a huge impact on how students feel. And anyone looking at any of the support group discussions will see some students have great experience and some students don't have such good experience, and sometimes it's a very up and down. And those of you who've been student midwives, and that's actually all of us as midwives, will know it's not plain sailing. It's really hard work. You're having to balance study and working and being short of money and being stressed and learning a whole new language. And you kind of forget that sometimes. It's a whole new language. So we need to look at this, and it's midwife students. And when this project, which our two colleagues are going to be sharing with us, it's called the Positive Midwifery Project. And this project is exploring ways to support students through practice learning and through into preceptorship. So I'm really delighted. I'm going to actually introduce both Juliet and Mira together, because they kind of do a double act, and they're going to slip from one to the other, which is lovely. So I'm delighted to introduce Juliet Rayment. She's a sociologist and researcher in the UK maternity services. She's currently seconded from her role as strategy manager at the NMC to the Point of Care Foundation as a Humanising Care Fellow project. And for this fellowship, Juliet's spending 6 months coordinating the Positive Midwifery Project, bringing together student midwives, practice supervisors, assessors, lecturers, regulators, and others. Goodness gracious, this is a huge thing. To talk about how we can all support students to keep their midwifery spark alive in practice learning. You can see when I heard about it, I thought, this spark, this sounds wonderful. And also I'm also delighted to have Mira Waligora, who's a third-year student midwife on the MSc programme at the University of the West of Scotland. She's also, in her spare time, I suspect, Vice President of the University of West of Scotland Midwifery Society and a member of the Scotland Student Midwives Network. And she describes herself as a migrant and public service interpreter. I'd love to know more about that as well. So welcome to Juliet and Mira. Thank you so much for coming this evening, and the screen is now yours.
Thank you so much, Sue. Thank you for having me. So as Sue said, I'm a qualitative researcher and a sociologist by background, and I've done a lot of work for a number of years with universities doing research on organisational culture and maternity services, work around how people work together to provide safe and high quality care, how services are organised, and also a lot about how women make choices about what they like for their pregnancies, their labours and their births. But at the moment, I'm a strategy manager at the Nursing and Midwifery Council, and I've been seconded from that role to the Point of Care Foundation. So the Point of Care Foundation is a small charity, and it's dedicated to improving healthcare by focusing on relationships. So we know that we spend a lot of time talking in services around systems and processes and improving efficiency, and they recognise all of that really valuable work. But what their kind of thing is about working on relationships and the relationships between staff, but also really importantly, between health professionals and the people that they care for. So they do this by supporting the integration of patient experience into service design. And they also facilitate and coordinate Schwartz rounds across the UK. So some of you may have been Schwartz rounds, you might be involved in them already. And they're kind of at the root of all of the Schwartz rounds that happen in the UK. So the charity got some money, and they decided brilliantly to spend it on paying for 3 people to come for 6 months to work with them. So that's me, Alison Convey, who's a GP, and Sinead Rothery, who is a speech and language therapist. And we're all working on our own projects, but they're all things that are related to the aims of the Point of Care Foundation and also of interest to our employers as well, and ourselves, obviously. So they called this a Humanising Care Fellowship. And the Positive Midwifery Project has come out of that fellowship of me, this gift I've been given of time and space to bring together some people to make a difference in an area that I feel really strongly about. And I've gone back to where my heart is, in maternity care. So whilst I spent a lot of time hanging around in maternity services and talking to midwives and talking to doctors and talking to women and talking to everybody who works there, I don't actually have a lot of experience in education. I've done a little tiny bit of teaching, the odd lecture here and there, but education is not where I know best. So when I came to this project and had this idea, I really needed it to be a collaboration with other people who know a lot more about this than me, for example, students. So part of the project has been bringing together a collaborative group of people who consist of students, practice supervisors, lecturers and other educators, and also people who work nationally in policy. And together we've kind of worked out what it is that we want to do with this tiny bit of time that I've been gifted, and I've got the resources to be able to support the group to do that. So we're trying to gather positive examples, really good learning, those little sparkles and nuggets of good practice that happen across the country all the time, and find ways to kind of gather those together and share how we can best support students in practice learning and how we can support those who support them as well. So in our first meeting, we had a talk about what we thought made a positive learning environment in maternity. What is it in maternity care that we kind of want to see more of? And there, once we know about that, we can see where we can make even a small contribution to those. So we identified a few, and they were things that are probably familiar that we would all like to see more of. So fairness and equity, personalised care, services that support relationships, listening, and curiosity, which is a nice one, and hope, and having a focus on progress, not just perfection. So these are big themes. They're big asks, but I think there's a feeling in the group that if we make a tiny contribution to any of those, then we've kind of done our job. So we're doing good work. So we want to make a difference by hearing other examples of really good support that's happening in real life clinical practice. And we're doing that by having workshops with students, but also through a survey, which has some open answers that people can share their good experiences. And in the first instance, we're producing a top tips guide for students, and another for practice supervisors on how they can support midwives to thrive. So it's a really practical project, but at the moment it's really tiny scale. So we've been working on really focusing on what is going right. We're taking a preceptorship inquiry approach. So that's really just a fancy way of saying that we're learning from the strengths. We know that lots of people in maternity are doing work at the moment on learning from what's going wrong. And that's really important. But sometimes when you focus entirely on that, you forget to notice the stuff that's going right. And so this project specifically has been set up to focus on looking at what's going right and what we can learn from that and how we can spread that good practice further. And I think that positive approach has had a positive impact on the group too, because in the group sessions, we also talk about our own positive experiences about our work. And that's kind of given the group members a little bit of a spark as well. So that's really been a positive impact, both of the project, but also the content. So as part of the project, I have been speaking to some students in kind of workshop space about the qualities that make a good midwife. I've asked them what the qualities are that make a good midwife and which of those are really important to them. And a number of words have come up, like compassionate, non-judgmental, caring, knowledgeable, supportive, organised, respectful, and also things like being competent and transparent have come up too. And they were words that are probably very familiar to all of you. I've done this before. I've asked students before, maybe 10 years ago, and the same words always come up because those words are really at the heart of a midwifery professional identity. So we know that students start with really strong midwifery values and a strong motivation to uphold those and to put those into practice, but they often face challenges. So as the group, we've spent a bit of time discussing what we think the challenges are, because that's a way to start. And these are just a start. These are some of the things that we've thought about. But, you know, the obligation for students to adapt to a workplace culture that might not always be positive, not feeling listened to or respected themselves. And sometimes students come in with a lot of career or life experience that they've had before. Hierarchies, discouraging students from asking questions or engaging with senior staff, and so they lack confidence in speaking to senior colleagues. And also we noticed that students really maintain special relationships with women and families, and what can we do to really cultivate that and support them to go forward with that and be able to do that when they go into practice. So these big questions, some big questions. How do we help student midwives retain that passion and those values? And what is currently working well for students? How can we amplify that? How can we share that? How can we let other people know? And what support do practice supervisors and assessors and lecturers also need to help students to thrive? So those are kind of the fundamental questions that we're asking. This project itself is really short. I've only been given 6 months of time at the moment, so we're just starting out. But we're hoping to, I'm going to talk a little bit. I'm going to hand over to Mira in a minute to share her experiences of being a student midwife, and then we'll come back and talk about what we're planning to do with this time and what we're planning to do in the future. So I'm going to pass over to Mira now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliet. So as Sue said, my name is Mira, and I am a third-year student midwife at the University of the West of Scotland. I'm also the Vice President of our Midwifery Society, and I am also class rep, and I've held both of those positions for the past 2 years. And through that, I have had the honour of having an insight into my fellow student midwives' experiences, the positive and the struggles, and I've been able to hear examples of where students feel safe and supported to flourish and develop the skills and confidence required of registered midwives. So I think that's something that must be a priority for clinical staff and academic staff alike. And why is the spark important? I don't think it's just a nice to have. It's a necessity. As you said, Sue, the midwifery degree is a hard degree. It is physically, mentally, emotionally, and financially exhausting. And I think the spark plays a really big role in supporting students. A newly qualified midwife friend of mine told me the other day that she had a day where she felt wiped out, and the day felt like it wiped her out and filled her cup in equal measures. And I think that's the power of the spark, is that it can fill your cup when it feels like everything around you is emptying it. So you kind of end up on a net positive. So when I heard about this project from one of my fellow student midwives, I wanted to get on it, and I'm so grateful to be part of it. So what is the spark? It's a really individual experience and feeling, and I'm looking forward to the results of the survey. For me personally, it's about enthusiasm. It's about enthusiasm and reciprocity. It's that smile, someone smiling back at you when you smile at them. It's someone saying, yes, that's a great idea, let's do it. The enthusiasm and the reciprocity gives me encouragement and makes me feel supported. And I think those are, again, these important ingredients to create conditions to flourish. So how do we nurture it? It's important to remember that students aren't just student midwives. They play so many different roles. They have a home life within which they might play many different roles. And even as student midwives, we are on theory, we are on placements, and those require really different skills from us. So on theory, for me personally, what keeps the spark alive is the community. It's spending time with other students. It's sharing stories and laughing till we cry about things. It's the hugs, nothing quite like a student midwife or midwife hug to get the oxytocin flowing. And on placement, it's different. The community that we have on placement is different because we don't see each other as students all the time. So the community on placement is the women, of course, the women and the birthing people that we look after and the families that we care for, and seeing the impact of the care that we provide. I know that that ignites every single one of our sparks. It's also about the midwives that we're practicing with and the midwives that we work with. And the practice supervisors and practice assessors play such a key role in the experience that students have, and the quality of the relationships between the students and the practice supervisors and assessors can really make or break a student's experience. And these relationships are not necessarily based on being friends or liking each other personally. I think it's important to nurture them as professional relationships. And both parties play a big role in that. And the part that practice supervisors play in it, I think, is about creating safety, is about creating a safe psychological space for students to make mistakes and to ask questions without being written off as incapable or incompetent. I had a beautiful experience at the start of this academic year on my first labour work placement as a third-year student midwife, where both of the midwives I worked with, my practice supervisor and my practice assessor, did just that, created a safe psychological space for me to ask questions, to question practice. And through the conversations that we had and really the debriefs that we had, I was able to learn so much, and it really improved my practice and my knowledge. And it was great. One moment that stuck in my mind in particular was when my practice assessor asked me to go and look after the woman in a room, and she kind of, asked me to go in there myself. And I must have looked at her with a really blank expression on my face. And she just looked at me and said, "On you go, I trust you." And in that moment, it was this magical spark that, ignited. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I trust you and you trust me, so I trust me. So off I go. And off I went. And so I think the trusting students, creating these professional relationships of trust are really, during placement, what supports the spark. As students, we have a very important lesson to learn, and that's to differentiate between what is us and what is me and what is the system. And a great research that I found for this has been Kate Greenstock's book, Flourish. I remember picking it up during my second year labour work placement. It was a 10-week long placement, and everybody says that second year is the hardest, and it was tough. It was a tough time. And I remember opening this book and reading about moral injury and compassion fatigue and trauma exposure and all these words that I hadn't necessarily heard before, but it all gave me such a sense of validation to the experiences that I was having and going through. The words that Kate wrote, validated my feelings and my experiences and helped me understand that it wasn't me, that there was nothing wrong with me struggling at this point in time, that I was existing within a really tricky and complex system. So keeping the spark alive is about the enthusiasm, is about the reciprocity, is about the relationship with other students, other midwives, the women that we care for, but it's also about having these tools at our disposal, which help us nurture ourselves and each other. So really, it's a collaborative process between the students and the midwives, the staff, and everybody else in this mad maternity midwifery world. So I am really looking forward to the results of the survey, to hearing the responses and seeing what students and midwives across the country feel ignites and keeps their spark alive, and to see what the common themes are. And hopefully through that understanding, we will have more tools to support each other. And on that note, I'll pass back to Juliet to talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks so much, Mira. I love hearing Mira talk about her experiences. It's so powerful, as it is hearing anyone's first-hand experiences of their work. And I think, she came up with so many great phrases like the enthusiasm and reciprocity and nurturing and community and that respect. I think that was such an powerful moment of that respect and that shared professional relationships based on trust. So like Mira mentioned, we're collecting some experiences from the group, but also really importantly from a lot of people across the country at the moment. Through this survey, we've had an amazing response, particularly from students. But I'm really hoping that we're going to hear from more practice supervisors and assessors. We do have some, but they're not as many as the students. The students are all over it. And it's fantastic to hear their experiences, but I'm really keen to hear what we can do better to support those who are supporting the students as well. So what next? At the end of March, I'm going back to my day job, and there's still so much to do. So the Positive Midwifery Project Collaborator Group are going to be launching a new community of interest around practice learning. And I'm really hoping that will collectively, that group will take this work forward, with me taking a bit more of a backseat. We're holding a launch event and we're making plans then for what we can see, what we want to see change in the future and what we can do to make that happen. So that's kind of the next step. And I'm really hoping that this project together carries some momentum forward and that other people can kind of step up and take hold of it and move it in the direction that they want it to be. Before I go, I'd really like to share this response we've received from a practice supervisor, because I think it encompasses why doing this work is important, both for students, but also for those who support them. So we asked, what do you love most about working with students? And this is what they said. I love being able to give them the knowledge I wish I'd been taught, as I didn't have the best placement experiences. It's also fun to be working with someone, and it helps the day go faster when you have some help. It keeps my midwifery spark alive when I have an enthusiastic student, as it reminds me of how I was when I started and the reasons why I became a midwife in the first place. makes me feel like I'm making a difference to someone's journey. And it's so satisfying to see my student grow and become more confident in their skills because of their time with me. Working with students makes me feel like I'm a good midwife again, because it's easy to be plagued by self-doubt in the current NHS climate. Public opinion of us is pretty demoralising sometimes, plus the way we're expected to code with no thanks for getting through it, just criticism when something's missed. And students remind me that I can actually contribute something good by teaching them. So thank you.
That's lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much to both of you. And now, audience, come through with the discussion, because I think that you've given us some lovely thoughts about the collaboration is lovely. And I'm kind of thinking that when you were talking, Juliet, about the practice support supervisors and what they were saying, and getting their sparks, that's really important. And you kind of forget that, because you hear sometimes midwives saying, "Oh, I've got the student today." And when I hear that, I hate it, but it kind of feels as though it's just another task, whereas you've just shared that, and that makes me feel, well, that's what we should be thinking. And there might be a day when you think, "Oh, I'm just not in the mood for teaching." But actually, if it's a way of getting those little sparks actually in our own hearts, and kind of regaining some of the joy of why we came into midwifery. We all came in for slightly different reasons, but to help women and help babies into the world, and help make families and support families. And we need to regain that joy. So thank you so much for starting the kind of thought processes on that. I actually ought to say as well, I'm looking away just so anyone turns two screens. On one of my screens, the questions come up and the comments. And I understand we have viewers in Bulgaria, New Zealand, and Slovakia. So welcome to viewers. Have students learning midwifery or nurse midwifery all over the globe, and the issues are the same. The tensions on midwives to be able to sort of juggle everything and be calm and learn. Actually, I thought that was very interesting about what Mira was saying about the midwife showing she trusted you by sending you off into a room. It's like being sent off into the community on a visit on your own. And it's so exciting the first time you do it, but scary. Big scary. I didn't hear you saying you were scared though, Mira. I'm amazed and impressed. And even a little bit scared.
I think it's the midwife's trust in me.
Wow.
She didn't wobble, so I'm not going to wobble. Yeah.
Fabulous. That's what it's all about. That's lovely. That really was nice. And I love this community of interest. So the community of interest, where will that be based, Juliet?
I mean, it's virtual, really. We're having a first meeting face to face, because I just thought we so rarely get face to face these days that it would be nice to try and make that happen. So we're meeting face to face for the first time, but following that, it will be virtual, and I think that's the way to make it accessible to as many people as possible.
Okay, that's good. So you'll notice on your resources you've got a Padlet, and that might be new for some people.
Yes, that's right.
So to unleash what this Padlet can do.
Yeah, sure. So some of you might be familiar with using Padlet for teaching. I think it's often used for teaching, but I realise it actually makes a great way of putting out little articles about a project as you're going along. There are a few principles, I suppose, that I found I wanted from this project at the start, and then I've gradually kind of as the collaborative group have got involved, then they hopefully will have more and more and more influence over this. But I wanted it to be collaborative, and I wanted it to be transparent, and part of that was being able to share work in progress as it goes along. So I'm not just waiting until the end where everything's finished and kind of sewn up and publishing it then. So Padlet was a really nice way to publish little articles about what we've been up to, what we've discussed in the meetings, some questions that have arisen, and I'll be putting out some initial headline findings that we've discovered from people's experiences around the country on there. So you can go there I think, Sue, you're going to share the link
Yeah,
around.
the link's gone out on the Facebook.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, great. So if you want to find out more about the project and see how you can get involved, then that's the place to start. So if you go there, then there are a load of links to different places. Like if you're a practice supervisor or an assessor or a lecturer who would like to share your experiences, then that's the place to start. You can follow the link to the survey from there. You can also follow the link to sign up for our first face-to-face launch meeting. And you can also read about a little bit more about how the project came about, and really welcome to email me as well if you've got any comments or questions at all. My inbox is always open. So the Padlet is really just a kind of holding place, a really handy holding place for all the information about the project.
Now, is it very heavy on academia, Juliet, this Padlet thing?
Oh, I don't know. No, I'm out of the loop with academia, so I haven't worked in academia for a while. But Mira is right in the thick of it. So
what do you think, Mira? Would your average midwife and your average student find the Padlet quite accessible? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Padlet in particular, you mean?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There's little snippets of Juliet's wonderful voice that I could actually listen to all day. And short articles, it's very, I mean, much nicer than maybe scrolling on Instagram, but short bite sizes that are really accessible, so not academia heavy at all.
Okay. So I'm just reassuring those of you.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, I think I misunderstood.
It's very attractive because if you haven't met, and this is more new languages we're learning, because I learned about Padlets a little while ago, but it was new to me, and I'm thinking this is interesting. I'm going into it. I mean, they all are going to vary, but it's this. You will see when you follow the link. It's very attractive. And there's lots of little things that you can go in and just have a look at and challenge.
Yeah, and if you can't be bothered to read the articles, like Mira said, I have made little 1-minute synopses of what we're doing. So you can just listen to me tell you. And then, if you're driving, well, maybe not be driving, can't go on Padlet, but, you can just listen. Don't even have to read it. And the idea is to make that as accessible as possible. Also, the survey, you can respond using your voice. And I'm really encouraging people to do that. So you can listen to the questions and then you can just speak into your computer or into your phone and you can respond that way. So really trying to find ways to make this whole project as accessible as possible to people who I know are very busy and have lots of competing attention and competing things on their time.
Absolutely. Well, but it is very attractive to say. So well done. But I was just wondering, because you are both very, very positive, and this sounds such a lovely project. But have you had anything negative back from students? Because I mean, we've talked about students going up and down, and it is one of the I think it's one of the hardest courses to do, because you're not just learning. You're not just learning academic stuff, you're learning your hand stuff, and you're also having to juggle everything else. And of course, the majority of our student midwives are women who are also juggling everything else as well. Though there are some men, and apologies to any men who might be offended. I know there are a small number. But
yes. So the questions we've asked have been focusing on gathering positive experiences. So you ask the right questions, you get the positive answers, right? But we have got an extra question that asks whether there's anything else that people want to tell us. And yes, people obviously have spoken a lot about how difficult the course is, about the demands of it in so many different ways. And one of the great things about having Mira and the other students involved in this course is that they know which questions to ask. So, for example, I was trying to work out which questions I could ask to get a sense of some kind of factor that might influence people's experiences of their placement generally. So like a tick box question where I'd be like, oh, I was trying to think about whether it mattered which kind of course they were doing, whether they were doing the MSc or the BSc, or whether they were doing, and whether they'd been a nurse first and they were doing this short course. And actually, of course, the most important question is, do you have lots of other stuff going on in your life? Do you have caring responsibilities? Do you have to travel a long way to get to your placement? Do you have a part-time job? And those are the questions I really needed to ask. And that's why I needed them to tell me that. So it was brilliant to be able to ask that. And obviously, lots and lots of people do. And some people are dealing with multiple factors that make it difficult for them in placement. And I think one of the issues that may come up is kind of encouraging people to appreciate that students have a lot going on in their lives outside of being a student, as well as Mira's already said, and a lot going on within the course too.
No, that's fab. That's fabulous. Thank you. Now I've got some questions coming through. Thank you, everybody, for feeding your questions through. And again, I'm saying Bulgaria, New Zealand, and Slovakia. Welcome. We've got Francesca Cooper. Hi, Francesca. And she's saying, thank you for sharing your story stroke project. How can we become part of COP? Just
brilliant. Well, your first stop is to go to follow the link that Sue shared, go to the website, and then you'll see a list of links. One of those is that you can sign up for the meeting. You can also sign up for a newsletter. I've got an email list to keep people up to date. So every time I publish something on the Padlet, I try and send an email around to the group. And that would be a really good way of keeping in touch with the group, even if you can't make that first meeting, because I recognise it's a big deal to ask people to come to a face-to-face meeting.
Yeah, because that's in London. Is that London based?
It's in London, yeah, on the 20th of March, yeah.
Okay, put that in your diary. Okay, we've got Kurt Lee. Hi, Kurt. And Kurt says, how can we as student midwives showcase our abilities and prove ourselves to our mentors for them to trust us? That might be one for Mira.
Thank you, Kurt. It is a tricky question, isn't it? I think it's all about those relationships, and it's about setting expectations. And when you meet your practice supervisors, and I know that quite often you meet them and within seconds you're in a room and then it's 5 weeks later, but when possible and when you can, to discuss, what do I need and what do you need? What kind of feedback do I need? How do I receive feedback? How do you give feedback? And discussing these expectations so that we can sort of be on the same page, because I think quite a lot of professional relationships maybe don't match up because of miscommunication and because of misaligned expectations. Obviously, practicing your skills and studying and being competent in the things that you do, but I think it's about setting realistic expectations with each other and communicating the needs between each other. That is something that we would be lovely if we had more time for, but it's about creating that time somewhere.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, because we don't always have the luxury of being able to just sit down for 10 minutes for a cup of tea and just chill out together, do we? But I think sometimes you can manage some things. And I guess I would say to Kurt, I don't know if we have to showcase. I think it's about being honest with our mentors and our supervisors and building up that relationship together, because they're not showcasing. Well, they might be showcasing themselves, but mostly you're just busy doing the job, aren't you? But thank you for the question, Kurt. It was lovely. And thank you, Mira. And we've got Juliet Samuel. Hi, Juliet. And she says, Juliet, I'm sorry, I might have missed the introductory information. Please, can you advise on how wide or extensive in terms of geographical national base the project is?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a UK-wide project. We've not been engaging with anybody outside the UK for this project. Maybe that will happen in the future. But yeah, we're encouraging anyone from all 4 countries to get involved. So that's great.
Fabulous, thank you. And we've got Emma Clark. Hi, Emma. It says, I love working with students. We love you too. I agree with the comments you've given. They're our future. We have supervisors that are still trying to consolidate their own learning. So is it fair to ask them to teach a student at the same time? And as a student, does it make a difference? That's a really good question, Emma. So you're thinking about people who maybe shortly after preceptorships gaining their own confidence. I suggested it takes about 5 years to truly feel confident and competent as a midwife, and that's quite a long time, and a long time not to have a student in a way. But I don't know, Juliet, what would your response to Emma be on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really good example of where I don't know. That's going to be honest about that. I don't know. I've spoken to some newly qualified midwives who've been asked to have students, and I think it's really difficult. I think I'd agree that when you're trying to gain your own confidence, it's very difficult to then share with others. I think what really struck me from that quote that I don't know what level that how experienced that practice supervisor was, but there was that element that was really positive about working with students, that the spark goes both ways, that the students gave something to the supervisors as well as vice versa. So I could imagine that, you know, that relatively inexperienced midwives might really benefit from having the kind of motivation or the spark from working with students. But I can also see that it's an enormous amount of responsibility to be taking on when you're feeling unsure of yourself. I think, Mira, I don't know who you've worked with, whether you've got any insight into whether it makes a difference for a student.
Yeah, I think it's another great question, and very practitioner dependent, isn't it? I've worked with some newly qualified midwives, and it's been wonderful because they remember so freshly and so clearly being in your shoes and being where you are. And also, quite often, because they are still consolidating their learning, they will go through minute detail of why they're doing something, how they're doing it, which sometimes when you ask a midwife of maybe 5 or 10 years experience, well, why are you doing it this way? They kind of have to stop and think a little bit about it and come back to you on another occasion. So I would say it's very, you know, practitioner dependent. Obviously, both parties need to feel safe in their capacity and capabilities, but there's benefits to working with newly qualified midwives, definitely.
And how do you go about giving feedback, Mira, to your practice supervisor, or do you just, because I know I'm asking, thinking some students may feel, well, who am I to say how lovely you are as a supervisor, or how helpful you are, or could you have done it differently? I don't know.
Personally, I do love giving feedback and I love asking questions. So I think I try to just ask questions. And I do think it's so, in terms of giving feedback, it's a passion of mine really to let people know when they've made a difference to me, and to say, oh, I really enjoyed the way you spoke to that person. I mean, I've said it to doctors when I've been in a room and they've, you know, had a conversation with a woman that I found was really empathetic and compassionate, and I have gone out and said to them, just to say, that was beautiful to witness as a student. That gave me a lot of food for thought. So I don't think the hierarchy of student midwife really is important when you're giving feedback. Obviously, there needs to be respect, but as you said yourself, a lot of us student midwives come to the profession with a wealth of other life experiences. So don't be scared to give feedback, and it's quite often about asking questions. How come you did that? At uni we learned about this. Could you explain this to me? So figuring out these phrases of how to say things is really important too.
That's fantastic, Mira. That's really good, really good. So students out there, listen and learn. That's a lovely way of putting it. Thank you so much. Now we've got another query from Kathy Carter-Lee. Hi, Kathy, who's asking, where will the appreciative inquiry be published and when? That's one for Juliet.
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, so that is interesting a question, because I'm not seeing this as a research project in a kind of traditional way. So if Kathy means that I might publish it in a journal or kind of academic paper, there are no plans to do that. This is very kind of practical, very clinically based project. So at the moment, we're really focusing on pulling together the key top tips that we learn from students and from other people who support them about what we can do to keep students' spark alive, and to publish those in a kind of really small, easy to access document, like a one pager, or tiny, exactly, like a top tips booklet.
They can whip it out.
They can whip it out. Yeah, somebody said maybe something to keep in their pocket, or maybe an audio. You know, we might choose to do it in audio. I've quite enjoyed doing those little tiny snippets on the Padlet, and maybe something like that might be valuable for people to have it by audio. So that's what we're focusing our energy on at the moment. You never know what might happen in the future, and that's partly what the next phase is going to be about. I'm coming to you at the end of the first phase, but the whole next phase is an open book. So if anybody wants to get involved in taking this forward, and also doing something exciting with all of the information we get from the survey, because we're not going to be able to do everything with all of it by the end of March. So there are opportunities really to take all of that valuable information and to share it in new ways.
Oh, it sounds fantastic, because it sounds much as if it's out in the practice area rather than on a shelf.
Yeah.
Not that all research stays on shelves, but it's much harder sometimes to even fantastic research get it out there. I think there's a 5-year thing on that too. Okay, thank you for that. Now we have a comment from Jo DeGuston. Hi, Jo. She at Ames, Jo is. This is a really important focus. Thank you for this excellent briefing. Supporting our midwives of the future is so important. Please consider if engaging members of service users panels on university midwifery courses would be helpful. I know that's very close to Jo's heart because she represents.
Yeah. Thank you for the question, Jo.
Fabulous.
Yes, absolutely. And I think this does. I think I have been involved in recruiting student midwives as a sneaky service user in the past, although one with another hat, obviously. But I think this does happen, and I think it is obviously just so important that families and people who've used maternity services are involved in recruiting midwives, because they know what they need in that space. And I think students, a lot of those qualities that we recognise in students, the students that I spoke to, they identified that they learned some of those during the course, but actually a lot of them are things that they felt like they had before, and they were some of the qualities that had got them onto the course in the first place. And so I think having service users there who can spot those in people during assessment days and interviews is really important. I don't know, Mira, if you've got any other experience or thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Our university is interviewing students currently, and I believe that there are some service users and some students on the panel, so there's definitely a space for the breadth of individuals who are impacted and who student midwives will work with.
And actually, I love the way, Mira, you were talking about it. I can't remember the words you used, but it really felt as though you were seeing the women as well as the midwives as part of your community, which was lovely. And I can't, it just was the feel of it, which was really, and how it should be, because if we really talk about partnership, that's the nub of it.
Yeah.
Another spark. Women again.
And just to add to that, Sue, if there are service users who want to be involved in the community of interest going forward, then they are absolutely welcome. This is what they're all about. So the whole project is about improving ultimately the experiences for women. So I'm really keen that people don't feel like they can't get involved just because they're not a midwife or because they're not a student, or it's really about everyone who's involved in birth.
Fabulous. Well, I'm sure Jo will get involved. Fantastic. Thank you. Now I've got just going through the questions. Alana, this is a comment really. Hi, Alana. And she says, establish expectations and feedback processes is so important. My best experience with any of my supervisors was with one woman who tried to sit down for 2 minutes at the end of each shift for us to reflect on the shift, the good, the bad, and the bad from both of our perspectives. And that's a lovely example, Alana. Lovely. And that's 2 minutes. And I bet that 2 minutes felt like 10 or 12 really special minutes. So thank you for sharing that. It's lovely. Okay, now I'm very conscious of time now, and I did say this hour always goes the fastest of every week, every hour in the week. Now we've got a comment from Natasha Rossi. Hi, Natasha. And Natasha says, I just wanted to share a little spark I had today when calling up my placement area to gain information about supervisors, etc. I didn't know the midwife on the other end of the phone, but she asked questions, showed an interest, and told me they were looking forward to seeing us. The spark she inspired was so powerful to me. Now, that's such a small thing in some ways, but it's such a huge bit because someone is seeing you as an individual and kind of looking forward to welcoming you. That's lovely. Thank you so much, Natasha. Now I'm just waiting to just check and see any more comments or questions. I think we've reached the end of them, and this is perfect timing. So I want to say a huge thanks to Juliet and Mira, and I hope maybe further down the line and you're not having a huge published report, but maybe in the fullness of time, you perhaps come back and share some more kind of perspective on the project, because this is going to be something really important for students and for midwives. And thank you so much for sharing your time and your energy and the sparks with us, because I'm feeling very excited about it all. Thank you so much. Now I'm just going to say thanks to Mira and Juliet for joining us. Thanks to Angelo, who's in the background making sure everything's beautifully recorded, and you will get access to the recording, I think tomorrow, maybe the next day. Certainly there'll be a podcast available. I can't believe who are the ones that have a podcast at 6 o'clock in the morning on Friday. They're there. And it'll also be coming around in the newsletter. If you haven't subscribed to the newsletter, now's your chance, because it makes sure you don't miss anything. And also, I want to say next week, we're looking at neurodiversity and midwifery, creating supportive learning and care environments. So a little bit more student life as well. We have Emily Edwards and Nicolette Porter with us next week. There's also the Midlands Festival coming up in May, so don't forget to book that. Or if you're in Ireland or All Ireland, there's a festival coming up then. And in the meantime, and we're a little bit early finishing actually, perhaps I should say to Juliet and Mira, are there any other little tips that you'd like to finish with and leave you almost with the last word? I've stunned them.
Yeah.
I think for maybe to all the other students, not be afraid to ask for what you need. The worst is going to happen, someone's going to say no, but if you've asked for it, if you've asked for a debrief, it might not happen that day or the next day, but most midwives will try. So whatever it is that you need, however your psychological space looks, ask for the conditions to have that, because you do play an active role, a partnership in creating that. So, go out there and be brave.
Fabulous. I think Juliet's leaving you with the last word. I think that's perfect.
Mary needs to have the last.
Thank you so much. Now we've got Kurt Lee has come back after his earlier question, and it's just come through to me. So Kurt, you might get the last word almost. And he says, Mira, love you, pass on good feedback regardless of hierarchy. Have there been any occasion? Oh no, you can't have a question now. You've had one question, Kurt, but we love that comment anyway. Thank you. And Natasha says, really, really informative and enjoyable. Thank you so much, Juliet, Mira, and Sue, and everyone involved. And then Juliet says, great to have a positive orientation project. Thank you both. And I'm going to echo that. So thank you both. In the meantime, we'll see you next week, and take care of yourselves.